The 9,356th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda of the meeting is situation in Somalia. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Somalia to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome His Excellency Mr. Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, President of Somalia, and I request a protocol officer to escort him to his seat at the Council table. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the following briefers to participate in the meeting. Mrs. Catriona Lang, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Assistant Mission in Somalia. His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Al-Amin Swayf, Special Representative of the Chairperson of the African Union Commission and Head of the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia. And Ms. Cindy McCain, Executive Director, World Food Programme. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw the attention of the Council members to document S/2023/443, the report of the Secretary General on the situation on Somalia. I now give the floor to Ms. Catriona Lang. I thank you, Ms. Lang,
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, I am pleased to address you for the first time since assuming my duties in Somalia on the 5th of June. I am delighted to do so alongside the President of the Federal Republic of Somalia, His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, also the Special Representative of the Chairperson of the Africa Union Commission, Ambassador Suef Mohammed El-Amin, and the Executive Director of the World Food Programme, Cindy McCain. I am honoured to have the opportunity to serve in Somalia and assure you of my commitment to implement the mandate of the United Nations Assistance Mission. I am grateful for the warm welcome extended to me by the Federal Government of Somalia, federal member states, and the Somali people. The United Nations stands by the government and people of Somalia. The recent visit of the Secretary General to Somalia is testimony to that strong commitment. I am grateful in particular for the close partnership with the Africa Union Commission. I pay tribute to the dedicated service and sacrifice of the Africa Union Transition Mission in Somalia. I'd like to take this opportunity to convey my sincere condolences to the government and people of Uganda for the soldiers who lost their lives and were injured in the attack on the ATMIS Forward Operating Base in Bulu Maria, Lower Shabelle. While I condemn this heinous attack in the strongest terms, it is a stark reminder of the real and persistent threat Al-Shabaab continues to pose. Mr. President, my briefing today will cover 8 areas. Firstly, an update on my first 2 weeks in Somalia. Secondly, a political update. Thirdly, a security update. Fourthly, a humanitarian update. Fifthly, an update on women, peace and security. Sixthly, observations on stabilization. Seventhly, observations on transition of the missions. And finally, the priorities for the UNSOM mission over the next 6 months. So, Mr. President, my first update briefly summarizes my first 2 weeks on the ground. Since my arrival in Somalia, a country I first served in as a young UN staff member in the mid-1990s, I have had the opportunity to meet with President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, the Prime Minister, other ministers and senior government officials, and to visit 4 of the 5 federal member states. I have met members of civil society organizations and engaged with the international partners, including the ambassadors from ATMIS troop contributing countries. I've also spoken by phone to President Mr. Bihi Abdi of Somaliland. On my way here to New York, I stopped in Addis Ababa, where I met with the African Union Commissioner for Political Affairs, Peace and Security, His Excellency Ambassador Mankole Adeoye, and the State Minister of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia, His Excellency Ambassador Misganu Arega. My travels around Somalia have highlighted for me the tremendous progress that the country has made in state and peace building. His Excellency the President has rightly set out an ambitious vision for his country. And whilst many challenges and risks lie ahead, there are also many opportunities. And I urge all the international partners to lean in and provide additional support to the people of Somalia. Mr. President, my second update covers the political situation. Somalia has made significant progress in advancing key national priorities. These include, firstly, the appointment of the Independent Constitutional Review and Implementation Commission. Secondly, the passage of 11 pieces of legislation, of which 6 have already been signed into law. And thirdly, the successful one-person, one-vote district council elections in Puntland State. The March and May meetings of the National Consultative Council resulted in 3 governance proposals. Firstly, the revision of the national security architecture. Secondly, a model for fiscal federalism, and thirdly, an electoral model. The proposed electoral model provides for one-person, one-vote elections at all the different layers of government. This aspect has been well received. Other elements of the NCC electoral proposal, including a shift to a presidential system, a move to 2 political parties, and the alignment of electoral terms, have received more mixed reactions. I therefore welcome clarification from His Excellency the President that the proposals from the NCC are a starting point for further consultation. With that in mind, I urge the federal government to set out its plans for a rigorous and inclusive consultation process, including precise options for consultation and clarity on how agreements will be reached before decisions are codified into law or fed into the constitution-making process. Puntland remains outside the NCC process, but has indicated it will engage directly with the federal government. I encourage this dialogue to start urgently to ensure the process is fully inclusive. Finally, under my political update, I would like to express my grave concern regarding the ongoing conflict in Lasanud. The violence has resulted to date in 308 civilian casualties, with 36 people killed and 272 individuals injured. I commend the efforts by all parties, and indeed this Council, to bring about a ceasefire. Following the press statement of the 7th of June, UNSOM good officers are at the disposal of all parties to help agree on a peaceful way forward. To this end, I've engaged key stakeholders and held my first phone call with President Bihi to convey messages on the importance of dialogue, cessation of hostilities, and humanitarian access. My third update covers the security situation. The federal government-led counter-al-Shabaab operations have largely been focused on the Middle Shabelle region, Eastern Hiran, and Galmudug. During these operations, al-Shabaab has been degraded militarily and dislodged from a number of areas. This is a notable achievement, but al-Shabaab remains a significant threat. The remaining operations under the current Phase 1 offensive are to be completed in the coming weeks. Preparations for Phase 2 have begun and are also expected to be launched in the coming weeks. Additionally, Operation Black Lion, a Somali-led initiative with the frontline states, is also due to start in the coming weeks. This is intended to put additional pressure on al-Shabaab. 3 security challenges regarding the next phase of operations merit attention. Firstly, operations will take place against a recent resurgence in the scale, the tempo, and the geographic distribution of attacks from al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab's continuing capability and intent were demonstrated by its attack on the Pearl Beach Hotel in Mogadishu on the 9th of June, which killed 9 people, including 1 member of the UN family. Secondly, the next phase of operations, which moves further south, presents more challenging politics and clan dynamics. It will be essential to plan this next phase carefully to ensure the full integration of military and civilian efforts, including planned stabilization. Thirdly, operations will occur concurrently with the ATMIS drawdown, putting pressure on planning and logistics. Mr. President, my fourth update covers the humanitarian situation and the links to conflict and climate change. The current operation against al-Shabaab has created opportunities for humanitarian access to people in need. However, insecurity has also contributed to an extremely challenging operating environment for humanitarian agencies. From January to March, around 430,000 people across Somalia were displaced by conflict and insecurity. Approximately 580,000 people live within territories controlled by non-state armed actors, and most of those displaced are women and children. Somalia's overall humanitarian situation remains precarious, with 8.25 million people, that's half the population, requiring humanitarian assistance. Whilst famine has been averted due to a scale-up of humanitarian assistance and better than forecast rain patterns, the rains have also resulted in flooding, affecting at least 468,000 people and displacing 247 others. To address critical humanitarian needs, the 2023 Humanitarian Response Plan needs more than $2.6 billion. Halfway through the year, the plan is only 29.8% funded. I call on all Somalia's friends to increase the much-needed funding urgently. Droughts and flooding are sadly becoming more frequent in Somalia due to recurrent climate shocks. Traditional pastoral livelihoods are under severe pressure, and we are seeing significant urbanization as a result, including an estimated 800,000 more people now in Mogadishu. This calls for durable solutions, including through urban planning and investments in different forms of livelihoods. Somalia urgently needs access to large-scale climate finance for resilience and adaptation, and this will be a priority for me going forward. My fifth update is on women's peace and security. The inspirational women leaders of Somalia continue rightly to advocate for their rightful inclusion in political processes and decision-making. The commitment made by Somalia's political leaders to a 30% quota of women representation in the previous federal elections remains unrealized. In the recent district elections held in Puntland, only 17% of those elected were women, which is down from 27% in the first phase. Women's participation and representation needs to be codified in relevant legal frameworks, including the Constitution. As the first female SRSG in Somalia, I will be putting these issues at the forefront of my work. Mr. President, for the sixth part of this briefing, I would like to make some brief observations on stabilization. Stabilization activities continue to be implemented in areas recovered from al-Shabaab. The challenge remains the sustainability of these gains. This will require ongoing security, provision of basic services, reconciliation, and long-term political and state-building processes. UNSOM has responded to the request by the federal government of Somalia to step up our response on stabilization. A stabilization cell has been created, which will report directly to me. Our shared ambition must be matched with the resources to deliver the necessary stabilization response, and future military operations must be planned alongside stabilization interventions. For the seventh section of this briefing, I would like to discuss our transition plans. Mr. President, you will recall that UNSOM's strategic review recommends the mission plan for a triple transition. The first is the security transition. The second is the possible drawdown of UNSOS and the handover of the mission support functions to UNSOM. And the third transition is the eventual handover from UNSOMs to the UN country team. These three transitions are interdependent, and we cannot make decisions on one without carefully considering the consequences for the others. The overriding driver is the security transition. As we will hear from His Excellency the President and the SRCC, the planned June drawdown of ATMIS and handover to Somali security forces is proceeding. My provisional assessment of transition going forward is that the complexity, the constraints, and the pace of transition process presents risks. This will be challenging. I have started by forming a transition cell to ensure coherent mission-wide planning. That team is now working intensively on transition in collaboration with all relevant stakeholders. I would like to reassure members that we are identifying the questions that need to be addressed, but many of the solutions will demand a collective endeavour. Mr. President, for the eighth and final section of the briefing, I will conclude by highlighting my top 5 priorities for the UNSOM mission over the next 6 months. My first priority will be preparing the United Nations for the 3 transitions ahead, taking account of the challenges I have outlined. Secondly, I'll be focusing on positioning UNSOM to play a lead role in bringing together the international community efforts on stabilization. Third, I will be prioritizing supporting the various elements of the state-building process, in particular those related to the elections process, ensuring inclusive consultations, including with Puntland. Fourthly, I will support ongoing efforts to bring the conflict in Nasanu to a peaceful conclusion. Fifthly, I will support the government of Somalia to achieve HIPIC completion and an associated shift from humanitarian into resilience-based development programming, including on climate. Across all priorities, I will encourage the rightful participation and representation of women. Somalia needs to draw on the full talent of all its population if it is to tackle the numerous challenges ahead. In conclusion, Mr. President, the United Nations stands ready to support His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud in achieving his vision of Somalia as a country at peace with itself and the world. I thank you and the Security Council for your continued support.
I thank Ms. Ling for her briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Mohammed Al-Amin Swaif.
Monsieur le Président, Excellences, Mesdames et Messieurs, délégués, distingués membres du Conseil, honorable assistance, je vous remercie d'avoir bien voulu m'accorder l'opportunité de m'adresser aujourd'hui au Conseil et de partager avec vous mes analyses des principaux développements politiques et sécuritaires de ces derniers mois en Somalie, en prélude au renouvellement du mandat de l'ATMIS qui arrive à expiration dans quelques jours. Permettez-moi avant tout d'avoir une pensée solennelle en la mémoire de tous les soldats qui ont perdu leur vie dans l'exercice de leurs fonctions en Somalie. Leur contribution au service de la paix dans ce pays, au sacrifice de leur vie, ne sera jamais oubliée. Mr. President, I'm also honored to speak today alongside His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. On behalf of the African Union, I would like to recognize his stellar leadership in steering Somalia towards lasting peace and security. I commend the good collaboration between ATMIS, FGS, and international partners in the fight against terrorism for peace, reconciliation, and stability in Somalia. Speaking before me this morning was Ambassador Catriona Leng, the new SRSG of UNSOM. Our joint presence here is a reminder of the unique partnership that exists between the African Union and the United Nations. On 23rd May, Somalia marked an important milestone in celebrating President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud's first anniversary of returning to office. Somalis came together to commemorate the occasion and renew the call for peace, stability, and prosperity. As we reflect on the past year, it is clear that the stability ushered in last May has delivered great dividends and in many instances exceeded expectations. The progress made thus far is also a testament to the resilience and determination of the Somali people. Since my briefing in February, Somalia has continued to focus on building consensus on critical issues that will hopefully lead a transformative change in the country. I'm pleased to note the vehicle for advancing change remains the National Consultative Council, NCC. In December 2022, the NCC agreed on federal judicial model, a strategic milestone towards the establishment of an independent federal judicial system in Somalia. In March 2023, we saw a landmark agreement on the national security architecture, while in May, the NCC agreed on returning Somalia to one-person, one-vote elections. With the national security architecture agreement, we look forward to more work on cascading the agreement to the federal member state level and developing a sustainability and affordability plan. And with the Somalia's efforts toward universal elections, the African Union will continue to offer its expert support as we collectively work towards a more inclusive society in Somalia. Since the government's formation last August, I have been impressed by the collaborative working relationship between the executive and legislative branches. Both branches are committed to ensuring Somalia is governed under the protection of the law. In this context, I applaud the signing into law of several bills. Encouraging steps have also been taken to signal that the completion of the constitution review process will be finalized during the federal government's current term. I welcome the recent announcement by the constitutionally mandated bodies to complete the constitutional review process in 18 months. The successful completion of this task will significantly impact Somalia's future. It will require a broad national consensus that must include representatives of political institutions, political figures, traditional elders, civil society organizations, women and youth representatives, including from Puntland. Mr. President, turning to the security situation, we continue to assess that security remains relatively stable but fluid across all our sectors, with Al-Shabaab being the main threat to Somalia and presently the region. There have been important successes in degrading Al-Shabaab. Under the Somali Security Forces, SSF leadership, Al-Shabaab has been dislodged from over 70 locations across Somalia during the current offensive. This also benefited from ongoing ATMIS advisory support on the importance of compliance with international humanitarian law, human rights law, UNHRDP, and protection of civilians. It is clear that the SSF-led offensive, with support from ATMIS and international partners, has put Al-Shabaab under operational pressure. However, at ATMIS, we are mindful that our campaign against Al-Shabaab is a long-term campaign requiring a holistic approach. There will be days of great success, and there will be periods of setbacks. On 26 May, Al-Shabaab attacked ATMIS Bulumarere FOB, resulting in several troops being killed and injured. Since the incident, ATMIS, in joint operations with the SSF, has recaptured the Bulumarere FOB. The next phase of operation against Al-Shabaab will be significant as Al-Shabaab attempts to strengthen its weakened command and control structure. I welcome the federal government's decision to extend this campaign to the involvement of the frontline states, mainly Djibouti, Ethiopia, and Kenya. The operation, while military in objective, will have clear stabilization lines of efforts to ensure our existing military gains can be translated into a strategic success. Currently, ATMIS and the federal government are in regular consultation to ensure proper coordination exists regarding the frontline states' participation in the upcoming offensive. Mr. President, let me take this opportunity to update the Council on ATMIS efforts to implement the security transition. We now have a new leadership in place across the mission's 3 components, and we have, as mentioned above, successfully partnered and supported the SSF-led offensive. We have recently, in April, submitted the security benchmarks to Council, highlighting our collaborative effectiveness together with the federal government. I'm pleased to report with the steady progress in the federal government's first generation program. ATMIS uniformed personnel have increased their mentoring activities to the Somalia National Army, SNA, and the Somalia Police Force, SPF. To continue this activity, we appeal to ATMIS donors to continue supporting our police efforts in training the SPF. Turning to a key aspect of the security transition, I can report to Council that the drawdown of 2,000 ATMIS troops in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2628 of 2022 and 2670 of 2022 is now being implemented. Marka Ayub handed over on 18 June, Abdijaliil on 20 June, while Mirtko will be handed over on 23rd, Albao on 23rd, Kadale on 27, Al Jazeera 1 on 28, and Guerrilla on 30th June. I also welcome the strong partnership between Somalia and ATMIS in developing the Mogadishu document for the June drawdown of ATMIS troops. This joint position was accepted at the TCC's summit in Kampala following comprehensive deliberations. As a result, the June drawdown has been advancing with on-source support and will meet its deadline of 30th June. With the completion of phase 1, particularly the drawdown next week, ATMIS can create quick reaction forces and mobile forces. We also anticipate the deployment of key enablers such as attack and utility helicopters and long-range ICR and counter-IED capabilities. This will enhance ATMIS operation capability, thus enabling the mission to better respond to the SSF operation requirements in the battlefield. Mr. President, in the next 18 months, we must collectively agree on the role ATMIS should continue to play as it begins to draw down and finally exit Somalia. We must also reach a consensus on what exactly Somalia should achieve in the next 18 months to ensure the ATMIS transition is successful. Mr. President, another issue that needs our attention is taking the efforts of climate change. I'm particularly worried about the alarming rate of floods and droughts. As recently highlighted in the Secretary General's report, these have led to the displacement of around 1.4 million Somalis, with women and children being the ones most affected. In previous years, ATMIS has offered some support to displaced persons, particularly those in its area of operations. With the drawdown, Somalia will need additional support, particularly in finding durable solutions. Let me conclude, Mr. President, with some remarks on the upcoming mandate renewal. I believe we have a chance to improve on past mandates by aligning with the government's security priorities. We must support SSF leadership, hold liberated areas, and take over FOBs. These forces require resources to fight Al-Shabaab and stabilize newly liberated area. This calls for the lifting of the arms embargo on Somalia. سيد الرئيس، يحتاج الصومال إلى جميع شركائه وأصدقائه لتحويل حلم السلام والاستقرار والأمن إلى حقيقة دائمة، ولذلك فإنني أحيي تصميم الحكومة الصومالية وإرادتها السياسية على حشد جميع القوى النشطة لضمان النجاح الكامل في تنفيذ المرحلة الانتقالية التي ستفتح صفحة جديدة في تاريخ الصومال الحديث. وما زلت مقتنعاً بشكل خاص بأن الصومال والشعب الصومالي يمكنهما أيضاً الاعتماد دائماً على كرم ودعم مجلس الأمن والمجتمع الدولي قاطبة في بناء حاضر ومستقبل أفضل. وشكراً. السلام عليكم.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Al-Amin Sway for his briefing. I now give the floor to Ms. Cindy McCain.
Mr. President, thank you for inviting me to brief the Security Council on the dire hunger emergency unfolding in Somalia. This is my first time before the Council since joining the World Food Program, and I welcome the opportunity to contribute to your vital work. I went to Somalia just last month, and I saw for myself how conflict and climate change are conspiring to destroy the lives and livelihoods of millions of Somalis. I was horrified and heartbroken by what I witnessed. Violence, fear, and starvation are a daily reality there. I spoke with mothers in a camp for internally displaced people in Dolo. The women told me stories of entire herds of livestock being wiped out in the droughts, terrorists recruiting children as young as 11, and the dangers they faced every day as they fight to survive. One woman I met, Halima, told me she had fled 200 kilometers from her home with her family of 10 to protect her young sons. She said armed groups had been taking boys from their families by force to join their ranks, killing anyone who refused. For Halima, the violence and instability has been even more devastating than the vicious drought. And she said to me, even if you have everything you need, you cannot live in a place with conflict. I'm here today to tell the Council that Halima and her family and the countless thousands like her urgently need help and hope. Somalia has hauled back from the abyss of famine in 2022 because the international community saw the warning signs flashing red and raced to respond. Donors funded an unprecedented humanitarian scale-up, but now we are in danger of losing the precious gains we have made since those dark days last year. The violence and instability which scars the country has destroyed much of the infrastructure needed to support food production and distribution. What hasn't been wrecked by conflict has been consumed by Somalia's climate crisis, which its people did not cause. The longest drought on record killed millions of livestock and decimated crops. It has recently given way to disastrous flash floods in the south of the country. Inevitably, huge numbers of people have been forced from their homes and lands in search of food and safety. Since the start of 2022, conflict has triggered over 1 million internally displaced people. Climate disasters have fueled a further 2.1 million displacements over the past 3 years. Continually having to move have left people impoverished, traumatized, and hungry. The latest food security data shows that food insecurity is spiraling across Somalia. Over 6.6 million people, that's 1/3 of the population, are expected to face crisis or worse levels of hunger. This includes 40,000 people fighting for survival in famine-like conditions. And even worse, 1.8 million children are expected to suffer acute malnutrition. Mr. President, we need a 5-pronged action plan to address the serious and growing emergency in Somalia. First, I call on all member states to immediately contribute to the humanitarian response plan for Somalia, which is seriously underfunded. At WFP, we are forced to cut back our life-saving assistance programs just when they needed it most. By December 2022, we were reaching a record of 4.7 million people per month with food assistance, thanks to the donors' efforts to stop famine in its tracks. But at the end of April, we had to reduce our caseload to 3 million per month. And without an immediate cash injection, we'll have to cut our distribution list again in July to just 1.8 million per month. That's almost 3 million women, children, and men who will be denied the assistance they desperately need, simply because we don't have the money to feed them. If we get the funds we need, we will reverse these life-threatening cuts and continue supporting the millions who rely on WFP for survival. Second, we all need to work together to ensure life-saving humanitarian assistance reaches the people of Somalia. This means ensuring operations are run with maximum efficiency to stretch every donor dollar as far as possible. WFP has the largest presence of any UN agency in Somalia, with 13 offices across the country. We are working hard with our donors, partners, and the government of Somalia to ensure our assistance reaches those we know are in the greatest need. Third, food assistance must be matched with investments to rebuild livelihoods, strengthen resilience, and support climate adaptation programs. These proven solutions are the only way to finally break the vicious cycle of hunger and poverty, which has so many Somalis in its grip. Fourth, the Council must spearhead efforts to secure unimpeded humanitarian access to all vulnerable communities in Somalia. Too often, civilians living in territories controlled by armed groups are cut off from humanitarian assistance because access is either denied or for the safety of the aid workers is threatened. This has to end. Too many lives are at stake. Fifth, and finally, we all have to work together to find political solutions to create stability and peace in Somalia. This is what the exhausted people of Somalia want, and they need above all. WFP is ready to play our full part and help Somalia lay the foundations for long-term food security and an end to the scourge of hunger. But peace requires political will and leadership. We look to the Security Council to please provide it for Halima and all the other people of Somalia. Thank you.
I thank Ms. McCain for her briefing. I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, President of the Federal Republic of Somalia.
Your Highness, thank you very much. At the outset, let me take this opportunity to congratulate you, Mr. President, on the assumption of the presidency of the UN Security Council for the month of June. I also want to thank the briefers, the SRSG, the SCC, and the Executive Director of WFP for the wide explanation of the issues of Somalia and the situation, the current situation of Somalia. Mr. President, it is an honor to stand before you today as the President of Somalia, representing the hopes and the aspirations of the Somali people. I would like to begin by expressing our heartfelt gratitude to the United Nations Security Council for its unwavering support and strategic partnership with Somalia over the decades. This is a critical moment in our country's history as we simultaneously pursue state-building efforts, combat the menace of terrorist group Al-Shabaab, and address the challenges posed by severe droughts. In this speech, I will provide an update on political and security developments in Somalia, and I will advocate for the total lifting of the 31-year-old arms embargo that has limited our ability to protect our citizens, enforce the rule of law, and secure our borders. We recognize that defeating Al-Shabaab requires a multifaceted approach that includes capable and effective security forces, an inclusive state-building process, and the ability of the state to provide critical services to the public. My administration is working diligently on all these fronts to move our country towards durable peace and prosperity. Mr. President, let us begin with the progress we have achieved on the state-building front. As some of you may have been aware, Somalia has faced significant challenges in reaching high-level political agreements on critical issues such as nature of intra-state relations and how to transition away from the indirect elections for over a decade to over a decade. Since my election in May 2022, we have held 6 successive National Consultative Council meetings, resulting in a consensus agreement with the federal member states on allocation of power, the judicial model, fiscal federalism, national security architecture, and the electoral model of the country. These agreements pave the way for a more inclusive, representative governance systems in Somalia. Turning our attention to security and stability, I am pleased to inform you that the Somali National Army has made significant strides in the fight against Al-Shabaab in partnership with local communities. Over the past year, we have witnessed the recovery of more than 70 towns from the grip of the terrorist group, resulting in opening of the main north-south transportation routes and of vast areas of rich farmland in the country. We've also taken significant steps to tighten anti-money laundering and combating the financing of terror through regulations by closing over 300 accounts that provide illicit revenue to the terrorist group. This effort, along with the support to religious leaders conference that contested the ideological strategy of Al-Shabaab, have dealt a blow to their operations and have challenged their legitimacy within the society. Mr. President, through a combination of our military offensive's ability to dislodge and disrupt Al-Shabaab and the considerable advancement in the urban security efforts through enhanced intelligence efforts, we are witnessing a notable reduction in the terrorist attacks of our capital city, Mogadishu, and many other towns in south-central Somalia. Today, our capital is undergoing a remarkable transformation. Mogadishu's housing sector is experiencing a boom, and businesses are opening daily in the sectors of retail, hospitality, and healthcare, among others. This progress not only instills hope in our citizens, but also attracts investment and fosters a conducive environment for growth. In addition to these achievements, we have carried out over 240 stabilization activities in recently liberated communities in the regions of Hirshabelle and Galmudug states over the last 6 months. For many of the people living in these towns, Al-Shabaab was only the authority for up to 15 years in the past. In the next phase of our stabilization program, we are focused on deepening the extension of the state and the social contract with recently liberated communities through the provision of critical services such as policing, social services, governance, and reconciliation in those communities. Looking ahead, the next phase in our fight against terrorism is Operation Black Lion. This operation, which is still be the most critical offensive, aims to liberate nearly all the remaining Al-Shabaab-controlled territories across the country. With the support of our frontline states, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Djibouti, we are confident that this campaign will significantly degrade Al-Shabaab and pave the way for a sustainable peace and security. Although we have encountered a slight setback due to the rainfall and force generation requirements, operations planning is well underway. A team of multinational planning and operational experts have been deployed to Joint Coordination Command post in Mogadishu. This operation holds immense significance in our quest for lasting peace and security. In addition, we will have teams actively monitoring the civilian protection component in the upcoming military operation. This demonstrates our commitment to minimize civilian harm and uphold human rights throughout the offensive. The resilience of our success against Al-Shabaab is evident that the enemy has not taken back an inch of we have recovered from them in the last 10 months. Mr. President, simultaneously with the planning of the current and future operations, we are also working towards the full withdrawal of ATMIS forces from Somalia in line with the UN Security Council Resolution 2628 and 2670. The planning and implementation of the drawdown of ATMIS forces is being executed in close coordination with a joint technical committee between Somalia and the mission, African Union mission in the country. Phase 1 of the drawdown is nearing completion, and the Somali National Army forces are assuming responsibility for forward operating bases while collapsing 3 others. Once Phase 1 is completed, a joint assessment will be conducted to review the impact of the drawdown. The insights gained from the assessment will guide us through the Phase 2, anticipated to commence in September. I would like to take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude for the remarkable support Somalia has received from the African Union and AMISOM mission. The invaluable engagement of AMISOM in our nation has provided us the necessary room to make significant strides in our peace building and state building endeavors. throughout the past 15 years. The sacrifices made by the courageous men and women from the troop-contributing countries shall forever be etched in our collective memory in Somalia. Mr. President, on the humanitarian side, we have been able to avert famine through our sustained partnership with the United Nations and the generous support from the United States and other donors. However, we remain committed to maintaining an effective and sustained response to ongoing drought, prioritizing the well-being of our people. I'm a strong advocate for genuine transition from traditional assistance to resilience-based investment by investing agro-pastoral communities and addressing the effects of climate change, such as through water catchment systems, regenerative agricultural practices, and feeder roads. We can enable those communities to sustain themselves economically and ensure their long-term well-being. Allow me, Mr. President, to share an example of the impact of such investment can have. The completion of only 30-kilometer Mogadishu-Afgoye road has not only improved economic livelihoods for farmers of the area, but also made certain food staples more affordable for the residents of our capital, Mogadishu. Mr. President, on the economic front, we are nearing a significant milestone, achieving the heavily indebted poor country's epic completion point by the end of this year. Over the past decade, we have undertaken extensive macroeconomic and fiscal reform to position ourselves for the achievement. As we plan for the post-epic environment, we are focusing on policies that promote revenue generation and strengthen our public financial management systems. Furthermore, we recognize that our most valuable asset is our people. Therefore, we are committed to scaling up access to quality education and health services, especially for women and youth. As a former educator, I know how education can break the cycle of poverty. I grew up in a small rural community, and after my dad passed away, my mother struggled to ensure that I get an education. She was unable to read and write, and still she checked my homework regularly by seeing whether there were any red marks on the notes. Thanks to her determination, I want to own to the contribution to establishment of one of the premier educational institutions in our country. I want all Somali children to have such an opportunity in the future. To that end, my administration has already undertaken a massive teacher recruitment campaign that will bring 10,000 new teachers into the system in my mandate, with 20% of them being women. Already, 3,000 teachers have been recruited and undergoing a training at this moment. These teachers are dispersed throughout the country, allocated to federal member states' education system. Mr. President, however, despite these remarkable advancements, our journey towards peaceful and prosperous Somalia faces formidable obstacles. The prolonged arms embargo imposed on our nation since 1992, which is the longest arms embargo in the history of the United Nations. Let me state clearly that Somalia of 2023 is not Somalia of 1992, and Somalia deserves this to be considered. It's essential to highlight the challenges that the arms embargo measures and notification processes present for Somalia security forces. Acquiring the necessary lethal capability has become an arduous task, hindering their ability to effectively combat Al-Shabaab and provide lasting peace and stability in Somalia. Mr. President, and the distinguished delegates of the United Nations Security Council, this arms embargo is not contributing at any level to the interests of Somalia in the short term and in the long term. While we acknowledge the importance of international efforts to maintain peace and security, we believe it is crucial to reassess the situation in the light of the progress we've made towards establishing an effective weapons and ammunition management system, guided by the benchmarks proposed by the technical team from the Secretary General's office and reflected and endorsed in Resolution 2006 and 2662. Somalia's National Weapons and Ammunition Management WAM strategy has been effectively implemented through result-based action plans. We have made substantial progress in the registration, record-keeping, stockpiling management, thanks to the establishment of comprehensive and centralized national weapons and ammunition management database in Somalia today. We've worked tirelessly to strengthen our legal and regulatory framework, including the introduction of a firearms bill to control the possession, manufacture, storage, and use of firearms in Somalia. These crucial undertakings have substantially mitigated the risk associated with trafficking, illegal possession, and the improper use of weapons and ammunition in Somalia. These initiatives serve as a testament to our government's unwavering commitment to improving weapons and ammunition management frameworks in a coherent manner with the international standards. Mr. President, considering these significant developments, I implore you, distinguished delegates, to support our call for the complete lift of the arms embargo on Somalia. By doing so, you will empower us to assert our sovereignty, effectively combat terrorism, and build a peaceful and prosperous future for our nation. The menace of terrorists in Somalia is not limited to risk in Somalia only. It's a menace to the region, the continent, and the global at large. Together, let us seize this opportunity to unlock the full potential of Somalia, to create an inclusive and prosperous society, and to build a world where peace and security prevails forever. I thank you.
I thank His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud for his statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as Minister of State of the United Arab Emirates. I want to begin by welcoming His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud to today's meeting of the Security Council. I also wish to thank our briefers today, SRSG Laying, Executive Director McCain, and Ambassador Al-Amin. Your briefings gave well-informed, high-level insights on the complex challenges that Somalia faces. The address from His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud reminds us that Somalis themselves have the resolve and the vision to own the solutions to those challenges and pave the way towards a society that reflects their aspirations. The UAE offers its full support to Somalia in the spirit of partnership and our long-standing support to the country and its people. To this effect, today I want to make 3 points. First, it's important to support Somalia's national vision. In recent months, the federal government of Somalia has shown commitment to building state institutions that articulate a forward-looking strategy, beginning with the focus on reconciliation and on revamping their electoral system. We are encouraged by the fact that the government has taken steps through negotiation and dialogue towards reaching the need agreements and compromises on all three these processes. We commend in particular the focus on improving cooperation and exchanges between the FGS and the federal member states through National Consultative Council, inclusive discussions geared towards reaching a political agreement on power sharing and other outstanding issues of federalism are welcome, especially within the context of the constitution review process. By adhering to principles of mutual respect, dialogue, and compromise, and by putting in place mechanisms for reconciliation, it is possible to build a Somalia that reflects the aspiration of all its peoples. Despite these advances, the ongoing violence in Les Hanoud and the resulting civilian casualties are of great concern. The UAE strongly supports all efforts to de-escalate the tensions through dialogue, and we commend the efforts by the FGS in this regard. Second, greater emphasis should be put on supporting efforts to counter al-Shabaab. Today, we can all agree that Somalia's most significant challenge to achieving its political and socio-economic ambition is international terrorism on its soil. The UAE is deeply concerned about the increase in attacks by al-Shabaab against civilians and security actors, including those targeting ATMIS personnel and facilities. In the first quarter of 2023, the number of terrorism-related incidents surpassed all previous quarterly averages on record since 2016. Countering al-Shabaab is already an international effort, and in recent months the government of Somalia has undertaken steps that strengthen its security institutions and send a clear signal that dismantling al-Shabaab is a priority. These also include the progress made in the implementation of the arms embargo concerning al-Shabaab, strengthening its weapons management system and holding regular exchanges in the context of the Weapons and Ammunition Mechanism Working Group. Much more still needs to be done. The best chance of success will arise from striking a balance between advancing offensive operations while consolidating the hold on areas that have been liberated from al-Shabaab. In addition, there is a need to secure support from local communities while making further advances in order to prevent al-Shabaab from exploiting security vacuums. It is the responsibility of the Security Council to be vigilant to Somalia's needs at this critical juncture. This means ensuring that the tools this Council uses are fit for purpose and that measures adopted to constrain nefarious actors in the interest of states seek to help and not hinder the security needs of its people. As discussions around the drawdown of ATMIS progress, consideration and coordination between all parties must remain front and center to ensure synchronicity between the UN, Somalia's regional partners, and frontline state neighbors during the transition. Third, the international community must support the scale-up of humanitarian and climate change responses in Somalia. Moments ago, we heard in detail about the deeply distressing situation facing millions of Somalis each day. The situation is leading to regional spillover and instability, as a drought has driven hundreds of thousands of Somalis to seek refuge in neighboring countries. As always, women and children are hardest hit and make up more than 80% of the displaced population. Scaled up and coordinated assistance should be put in place to tackle the twin humanitarian and climate crisis. The UAE is working with Somali government and its partners to help alleviate the humanitarian needs on the ground. During the period of 2018 to 2023, assistance of the UAE to Somalia amounted to $194.6 million. The UAE remains a trusted partner of Somalia and shares a strong message of support. We will remain standing by the Somali people in their pursuit of sustainable peace and prosperity. I thank you. I resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to those Council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom. Thank you.
Thank you, President. And I want to start too by welcoming President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed to our meeting today and to thank him for his important briefing. I want to thank also SRSG Lang, SRCC SURF, and Executive Director McCain for your valuable briefings. Thank you. Somalia, as we know, faces many interconnected challenges, and we welcome and commend the progress that you have made. Let me make 3 points, President. First, on the humanitarian side, we are relieved that the system-wide scale-up averted famine and that the arrival of rains has ended the protracted drought. But climate shock and continued conflict will leave millions displaced and facing crisis levels of food insecurity. So we cannot afford to be complacent about the scale of humanitarian need. As the SRSG said, it affects 50% of the population. Second, President Mahmoud, we welcome your commitment to and progress in advancing political reforms and, if I may say, education reforms as well. The UK supports state-building efforts in Somalia, including the process of democratisation, and recent local elections in Puntland represent an important milestone on this journey. An inclusive, consultative process in line with the constitutional review is necessary for those reforms to succeed, and we encourage all parties, including Puntland, to engage constructively to that end. And inclusive politics at all levels will also be important in the fight against al-Shabaab. And that brings me to my third point, security and counter-terrorism. The UK commends the momentum gained from Somalia's operations against al-Shabaab. As you made clear, President Mahmoud, enduring progress will be measured by the ability to hold and stabilise those liberated areas. So I encourage Somalia to continue working with the UN and partners to coordinate stabilisation efforts and to prioritise investment in reconciliation as a foundation for long-term progress. Alongside hard-won security gains, Somalia has continued to take critical steps to prepare for security transition. We encourage the international community to continue to support Somalia to enable a sustainable, affordable, and accountable security sector to take full responsibility for Somalia's security as ATMIS draws down by the end of 2024. This Council has an important role to play, supporting both ATMIS to deliver its critical functions and plan a strategic drawdown, and meeting Somalia's needs as they assume responsibility. We welcome the federal government of Somalia's commitment to strengthen weapons and ammunition management. The benchmarks in Resolution 2662 were recommended by technical experts to prevent weapons reaching al-Shabaab. We urge all partners to join us in supporting Somalia to make further progress against these benchmarks, to facilitate lifting arms controls on the government. President Mohammed, you have our support for your efforts to degrade al-Shabaab militarily, financially, and ideologically. Through this Council, and as a committed long-term partner and friend to Somalia, the UK will continue to stand with Somalia on its journey to peace and prosperity. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for her statement. I give the floor now to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Госпожа председатель, приветствуем личное участие в сегодняшнем заседании президента Федеративной Республики Сомали Хасана Шейха Мохамуда и его выступление в Совете Безопасности на этом важном для его страны этапе. Благодарим спецпредставителя Генсекретаря ООН Катриону Лэнг и главу Афромиротворческой миссии в Сомали Мохаммеда Эль-Амин Суэфа за информацию о развитии ситуации. Признательны за брифинг исполнительному директору Всемирной продовольственной программы Синди Маккейн. Россия полностью поддерживает усилия Сомали по борьбе с экстремизмом, а также по государственному строительству и национальному примирению. За последние месяцы в этих процессах наметилась положительная динамика. Заседания Национального консультативного совета приобрели регулярный характер. В прошлом году Федеральному центру и руководству сомалийских штатов удалось договориться о распределении властных полномочий. За прошедшие месяцы этого года достигнуты значимые понимания, касающиеся федеральной фискальной политики, будущей электоральной модели и процесса пересмотра Конституции. Идет процесс укрепления национальных сил безопасности. Рассчитываем, что участники сомалийского политического процесса, включая руководство штатов Пунтленд и Сомалиленд, продолжат совместную работу по формированию в стране устойчивой модели федеративного устройства. При этом неизменно исходим из необходимости обеспечить территориальную целостность и единство Сомали. Констатируем остающуюся хрупкой гуманитарную ситуацию на всей территории страны. Несмотря на предотвращение голода, число нуждающегося населения по-прежнему очень высоко. Обстановка в сфере безопасности вызывает глубокую тревогу. Экстремистская группировка Аш-Шабаб сохраняет значительное влияние в стране, осуществляет регулярные вылазки в столице и на периферии, продолжает обстреливать международный аэропорт Могадишо. Согласно докладу Генсекретаря ООН, число терактов с применением СВУ в первом квартале текущего года превысило статистику последних лет. Категорически осуждаем все теракты, воздаем должное афромиротворцам и сомалийской национальной армии, включая тех, кто отдали свои жизни при выполнении своей миссии. Приносим соболезнования Уганде по случаю кровавого нападения Аш-Шабаб на базу передового базирования АТМИС в Нижней Шабеле 26 мая. В то же время отмечаем, что наступательные операции сомалийской национальной армии позволили потеснить позиции экстремистов в Галмудуге и Хиршабеле. Федеральные власти также способствовали урегулированию ситуации в юго-западном штате. Приветствуем запуск региональной инициативы пограничных государств по борьбе с группировкой. Еще одной болевой точкой за последние месяцы стала ситуация в Лас-Аноде. Поддерживаем посреднические усилия федерального, клановых старейшин и Эфиопии по урегулированию этого вооруженного конфликта. Исходим из того, что в соответствии с резолюцией 2592 УМОН-СОМ есть необходимый мандат по координации и поддержке усилий по межклановому примирению. Надеемся на скорейшее завершение этой конфликтной ситуации. АТМИС остается важнейшим фактором сдерживания экстремистской и иной противоправной деятельности в Сомали. Считаем важным при утверждении решений по афромиротворческой миссии исходить из реального состояния дел в области безопасности и учитывать приоритеты федерального правительства и государств региона. Полагаем, что сокращение контингента должно осуществляться согласно принятому Советом мира и безопасности Африканского союза и федеральным правительством Сомали плану, и по мере того, как сомалийские вооруженные силы будут готовы самостоятельно обеспечивать безопасность государства и его граждан. Положительно оцениваем деятельность отделения ООН по поддержке в Сомали, оказывающего значительное материально-техническое и логистическое содействие АТМИС, МОУНСОМ и Сомалийской национальной армии. Как представляется, приоритетом на сегодня является концентрация усилий международного сообщества на повышение эффективности федеральных силовых ведомств с тем, чтобы к выходу из страны АТМИС власти страны смогли взять на себя полную ответственность за безопасность на всей территории Сомали. Призываем руководствоваться именно этими установками при продлении мандатов АТМИС и МОУНСОМ в конце текущего месяца. Я благодарю за внимание, господин председатель.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation for his statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
谢谢主席先生。主席先生， 我首先欢迎马哈茂德总统出席今天的会议，这有助于安理会更好地了解索马里的实际情况和所方的关切，从而更有针对性地支持索马里实现稳定、发展和安全。我也欢迎新任特别代表莱恩首次向安理会通报情况，认真听取了苏埃夫特别代表麦肯恩执行主任刚才所做的通报。当前，索马里在政治进程、安全过渡、国家重建等方面取得了一系列重要进展，同时仍然面临着巨大的挑战。古特雷斯秘书长今年4月访问索马里，呼吁联合国和国际社会同索马里站在一起。结合秘书长提交的报告，我愿强调3点：第一，持续推进索马里政治进程。近期，马哈茂德总统多次主持全国协商会议，同成员邦积极探讨联邦制度、国家安全架构等重大问题。中方呼吁索马里联邦同成员邦通过对话增进互信，找到国家长治久安的办法。国际社会要尊重索马里的主权和领土完整，坚持所人主导、所人所有的原则，提供建设性的支持。我们反对任何破坏索马里主权和领土完整、分裂国家的行为。在拉斯阿诺德地区，索马里兰安全部队同当地民兵持续爆发冲突，我们敦促冲突各方立即停火撤军，开展对话，切实保护平民的安全。第二，加快推动安全过渡。沙巴布恐怖威胁远未消除，中方强烈谴责沙巴布近期对摩加迪舒珍珠海滩酒店、非索团营地等发动袭击，对包括乌干达在内的维和士兵遇袭身亡表示哀悼。当前，索马里安全过渡正处于关键阶段，索马里政府要加快安全部队建设，提升独立自主反恐能力。中方欢迎索马里同吉布提、埃塞俄比亚、肯尼亚达成前线国家倡议，深化地区反恐合作，维护共同安全。安理会应结合形势发展，研究调整对索马里武器禁运措施，支持索马里加强国防建设。中方赞赏非索团为维护索马里安全稳定做出的巨大贡献。安理会正在讨论非索团的过渡问题，我们希望索马里政府同非索团加强协调配合，稳步推进非索团缩编计划，确保平稳有序的移交安全责任。在非索团撤出前，欧盟等有关出资方要为非索团提供充足、可持续、可预测的资金支持。第三，促进发展，实现持久和平。古特雷斯秘书长访问索马里期间呼吁，开展反恐行动的同时，要帮助索马里增强社会韧性，加强安全稳定。在军事行动收复的地区，索马里政府要保障民众的基本生活，推动增强国家认同，维护持久稳定。当前索马里人道形势十分严峻，1半人口急需人道援助，660万人面临粮食安全问题。国际社会要加大人道援助， 确保人道资金及时到位。索马里也要改善人道准入，配合国际人道行动。莱茵特别代表要发挥好协调作用，调动国际资源，为索马里发展稳定创造良好的条件。索马里的未来应掌握在索马里人民手中。中国作为索马里的好朋友、好伙伴，一直坚定支持索马里重建国家、实现持久和平发展的努力，支持索马里提升反恐维稳的能力。去年以来，我们提供了2批紧急粮食援助，在农业、教育、渔业等领域积极开展务实合作，为索马里重建做出贡献。中方愿同国际社会一道，为实现索马里持久和平稳定，继续贡献更多力量。谢谢你，主席女士。
I thank the representative of China for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the A3, namely Gabon, Ghana, and Mozambique. We highly commend the United Arab Emirates for your leadership in convening this important briefing on Somalia, sister country. We wish to recognize, first of all, the presence of His Excellency Mr. Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud, the President of the Republic of Somalia. We welcome Your Excellency's participation in this meeting, and we attach great importance to the statement you have just delivered. The A3 welcomes the appointment of Ms. Catriona Lang as Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Assistance Mission in Somalia. We are confident that Ms. Lang will build on the commendable work done by your predecessor, Mr. James Swan, and effectively deliver on your mandate as head of ANSOM. We thank the African Union Special Representative of the Chairperson of the Commission, His Excellency Ambassador Mohamed El Amin Swef, and the World Food Program Executive Director, Ms. Cindy McCain, for your in-depth and informative briefing. Madam President, we commend the government of Somalia under the able leadership of His Excellency President Sheikh Hassan Mahmoud for the ongoing efforts to combat Al-Shabaab and restore peace and stability across the country. The success achieved so far in their fight against the terrorist group bears testimony to the Somali government's commitment to ensure the safety and security of its citizens. The A3 remains concerned that Al-Shabaab militants continue to pose a significant threat to innocent people as well as critical infrastructure and properties in Somalia and neighboring countries. Gabon, Ghana, and Mozambique condemn in the strongest terms the repeated attacks by Al-Shabaab against the civilian population, humanitarian actors, armies, and federal government forces. Al-Shabaab's recent attack on the Pearl Hotel in Mogadishu serves as a sobering reminder of their ability to elude security personnel and carry out deadly attacks. We strongly urge the government of Somalia, with the support of the international community, to step up its efforts to combat this threat and to further strengthen the ability of its security forces to prevent attacks of this nature. We urge this Council and the international community to continue supporting Somalia to ensure that the Somali government is able to effectively combat the threat of terrorism within its borders and to promote peace, security, stability, and development in the country. We hold the view that the mandate of ATMIS, which is currently being negotiated, must be clear, realistic, and tailored to the security needs of Somalia. This will enable the ATMIS to work with Somalia to ensure peace and security in the country. We are equally concerned about the renewed conflict in Lazanod, particularly in the Sol region, where violent clashes between Somaliland forces and the local Dulbahante clan militia have resulted in significant casualties, destruction of infrastructure, and displacement of civilians. In light of this, we welcome the progress made towards implementing the Southwest State Reconciliation Agreement. We urge all parties to continue working towards full implementation of the terms of the agreement as a means to fostering peace and stability in the region. To ensure that the people of Somalia can continue to live in peace and make progress, it is necessary that democratic space, freedom of expression, and openness be preserved. On the withdrawal of ATMIS, the current security situation in the country remains of significant concern. Thus, the drawdown of ATMIS troops needs to be conducted in a coordinated manner based on the forces generation by the Somali security forces to avoid the creation of new security challenges. In this context, the A3 fully supports the calls by the Somali government to the total lifting of the arms embargo. It is critical that the Somalia is able to raise a robust army to take over the security responsibilities, and this can only be achieved if the arms embargo is lifted, as said by His Excellency the President in his statement a while ago. The sovereign right of self-defense against terrorist attack must not be denied to the Somali people and the government. We urge the Council to heed the repeated calls and to support the efforts initiated by His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mahmoud and his government to liberate territories and ensure the safety and security of the Somali people. We welcome news of the completion of the ammunition storage facility in Jazeera, Mogadishu. This is a major step forward in the efforts being made to improve the management of Somalia's self-defense. Mr. President, we applaud the federal government of Somalia for its consistent efforts to advance its national priorities, particularly on the state-building process through political dialogue, as evidenced by the productive National Consultative Council sessions. Achievements in state building include the Fiscal Federalism Agreement, the National Security Architecture revisions, and the one-person, one-vote election model. These are important achievements in our view. In the same vein, it is encouraging to note that attempts are being made to further dialogue between federal government of Somalia and federal member states. A commitment to finding a peaceful and mutually beneficial solution to the lengthy and protracted conflict is demonstrated in the selection of Mr. Abdikarim Hussein Guled and Ms. Edna Adan as special envoys for the negotiations. The stability and development of the region depends on peaceful dispute resolution efforts like these. We, however, note with regret the failure of Puntland authorities to participate in the National Consultative Council meetings. We encourage President Sheikh Hassan Mahmoud to continue his reconciliation efforts to bring Puntland back to the negotiating table. We urge Puntland authorities to prioritize the interests of Somalia first. It is imperative that all stakeholders engage constructively and work towards a peaceful and successful Somalia. Mr. President, Somalia's determination and resilience in the face of challenges in its pursuit of economic progress and development is inspiring. Key legislation has been passed and fiscal federalism has advanced, putting Somalia on schedule for completion of the heavily indebted Poor Countries Initiative plan by late 2023. Despite this achievement, the detrimental effect of climate change on economic activity and low domestic revenue mobilization are just two of the many obstacles that the country must still overcome. In this regard, we encourage Somalia to keep moving forward on the path to economic growth and development, with a focus on taking steps to strengthen macroeconomic stability and increase domestic revenue mobilization. Additionally, we urge the international community to maintain its support to Somalia's numerous economic development programs. This objective can be attained with the aid of increased funding, technical assistance, and capacity building initiatives, and quick impact projects. By assisting Somalia in its endeavor to strengthen its economy, the international community would be contributing to the country's peace and prosperity. Madam President, millions of Somalians continue to be impacted by the drought, conflict, and flooding, despite intensified humanitarian efforts. While there has been some success in alleviating suffering among the people, high levels of food insecurity, malnutrition, and disease persist. The humanitarian community has identified over 7.6 million persons in need of aid, but it has only been able to finance 28% of the 2023 humanitarian response plan. To aid in Somalia's recovery, the international community must continue to contribute both humanitarian aid and long-term climate-sensitive development assistance. We urge the continuation of the vital collaboration between the government of Somalia and humanitarian actors, which is necessary for the mitigation of risks and the alleviation of suffering. Madam President, DA3 wishes to express its gratitude to the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia for its support to the Somali government in its pursuit of peace and security, despite difficulties confronting the mission in terms of finance and logistics. Gabon, Ghana, and Mozambique strongly encourage the international community at large, and this council in particular, to provide to ATMIS and the Somali security forces, including through UN-assessed contributions, to enable them to fulfill their responsibilities effectively. The A3 extends its gratitude to all those who are contributing to the stabilization efforts of Somalia. We urge them to continue with their support of the country and its people. Together, we can end Al-Shabaab's reign of terror in Somalia and usher in a period of peace and wealth for Somalia and its people. Gabon, Ghana, and Mozambique reaffirm their solidarity with the government and people of Somalia and their commitment to defend their independence, territorial integrity, and the sovereignty of this sisterly country. DA3 is ready to accompany Somalia on this journey. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for his statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Brazil.
Thank you, Madam President. As other delegations, I warmly welcome His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. I thank Special Representative Lang, Special Representative Elamin Swef, and Executive Director McCain for their valuable briefings. Madam President, we acknowledge the work undertaken by the federal government of Somalia towards the advancement of key national priorities, including strengthening dialogue with federal member states. Political unity and effective cooperation in favor of the Somali people are critical for further state building, peace, and sustainable development. We commend Somalia's efforts to advance the implementation of its national security architecture in parallel with the ongoing phases of ATMIS drawdown. A proper security handover is a key challenge that the Security Council and all relevant parties must assist Somalia to overcome in a sustained manner. As the Secretary General highlighted in his latest report, regional cooperation remains essential to addressing regional security concerns. We commend the efforts undertaken to establish the Frontline States Initiative. We welcome the commitment shared by Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia to expand operations against al-Shabaab in full compliance with international human rights law and international humanitarian law, and fully coordinate actions to consolidate security gains. Brazil reiterates its appreciation for the brave work undertaken by ATMIS personnel and the Somali security forces in support of peace and security in the country. While we commend their gains in the fight against al-Shabaab, the increase in terrorist-related incidents is nothing but alarming, especially with growing use of improvised explosive devices. In this regard, we recognize the work carried out by the UN Mine Action Service in delivering threat mitigation services. And as others, and again, we condemn in the strongest terms the appalling attack on the ATMIS forward operating base that Ugandan troops staffed in Lower Shabelle. We extend our condolences to the families of the victims. Madam President, Brazil shares with other Council members serious concerns about violence in Las Canad. We reiterate our full respect for the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and unity of the Federal Republic of Somalia, and call on all parties to reach a ceasefire agreement urgently. We support further efforts by UNSOM within its mandate to foster inclusive dialogue, promote peaceful dispute resolution, and engage with all parties to the conflict. Madam President, we commend the vital work by the World Food Programme and the humanitarian agencies in Somalia. At the same time, as indicated by the Executive Director, the humanitarian situation remains acute. A significant part of the population is on the brink of famine, and for many, life is a daily struggle simply to eat. Additional and flexible funding for food security is critical for preventing conflict. We call on Somalia to redouble its efforts to strengthen governance, foster community reconciliation, and provide essential services in areas deeply affected by food insecurity. If coupled with increased humanitarian assistance, these resources will be critical to consolidate security gains. In concluding, Madam President, Brazil reiterates its continued support for Somalia and underscores the importance of fully implementing the mandates of ATMIS, UNSOM, and UNSOS. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Brazil for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Albania.
Thank you, President. Since this is the first time that Ms. Lane is briefing the Council, I would like to congratulate her on the assumption of her duties as the new SRSG and head of UNSOM and wish her the best of luck. You can count on our support, ma'am. I also thank the African Union SRSCC Mohamed El Amin Souf and the Executive Director of the World Food Programme, Cindy McCain, for their briefings. Albania welcomes the President of Somalia, His Excellency Hassan Sheikh Mohammed, to this meeting. President, we welcome the efforts that Somalia has made to advance the implementation of its key national priorities since President Mahmoud took office last year. In political terms, despite the restricted cooperation between Puntland and the federal government, we are encouraged by the outreach between the federal government and the federal member states, resulting, among other things, in the creation of National Revenue Authority and the Planning and Allocation Agency. In addition to that, the decision to adopt a one-person, one-vote electoral model for Somalia and the historical election held on 25th May in Puntland were a democratic milestone allowing the voice of its citizens to be heard. This progress should be followed by a constitutional review process that is more inclusive for women, youth, marginalized groups, and to a widening and greater protection of its civic space. Turning now to the security situation. The fight against Al-Shabaab has made notable in terms of liberating territories and targeting its finances. In this vein, the agreement reached between Somalia and its neighbors to create the Frontline States Initiative could be crucial for advancing this fight while the security transition continues. Nevertheless, the international community should spare no efforts in assisting Somalia with services in the liberated areas. Al-Shabaab remains a threat for the security of the country. Albania condemns in the strongest terms the terrorist attack on the ATMIS base on 26 May, and we express our condolences to the families of the victims and the government and people of Uganda. We pay tribute to ATMIS troops who continue to serve and contribute to peace in Somalia. We also recognize the progress made by Somalia on assuming security responsibilities and force generation, as well as the positive efforts in strengthening its weapons and ammunition management capacity, which need to be continued. My delegation is also concerned about the ongoing conflict in Lascannod. We encourage the government to continue its de-escalating efforts in coordination with multilateral and bilateral partners and call on the parties in conflict to reach a ceasefire to put an end to the catastrophic humanitarian consequences, destruction of infrastructure, and displacement of civilians. This leads to our final point. Despite Somalia's progress under the Enhanced Heavily Indebted Poor Countries Initiative and the measures mitigating the risk of famine, we are seriously concerned about the humanitarian situation and the number of people affected by conflict and climate change. We join the urgent call on Somalia and the Secretary General to fill the funding gap for the 2023 Humanitarian Response Plan, as well as for the development initiatives required to build community resilience. Unfortunately, women and children remain the most affected group of displaced people, the most common targets of human rights violations, sexual violence, and recruitment. We call upon all parties to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian and international human rights law, and for authorities to hold accountable those responsible for violations of human rights. And I thank you.
I thank the representative of Albania for her statement, and now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Madam President, I thank SG Catriona Ling, SLCC Elamin Swift, and Executive Director Cindy McCain of WFP for their insightful briefings. I also would like to extend a warm welcome to His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud of Somalia for his participation in this meeting. This month, Somalia reaches an important inflection point in its security transition. The Somali security forces now shoulder more responsibility to protect their own land and people as the first phase of ATMIS drawdown continues. I would like to pay tribute to all the personnel of ATMIS and the Somali security forces for their dedication in support of peace and stability in Somalia and the region. We condemn the recent terrorist attacks on the ATMIS forward operating base in Lower Shabelle and wish to offer heartfelt condolences to those who made ultimate sacrifice and wish a speedy recovery to those injured. We welcome the continued operational advancements by the Somali National Army with the help of community defense forces, while further expansion of the SNA's operations to the southwest is expected, consolidating the government security control in those newly liberated areas is also an essential task to degrade al-Shabaab for preventing any recurrence of its intrusion. Developing sufficient holding forces in such areas is of the utmost importance, and for that purpose, acceleration of security sector reform should remain a priority. We commend the neighboring troop contributing countries to ATMIS for their continued support to Somali force generation by providing capacity building. We further commend the essential role of UNSUM and the UNSUS in supporting ATMIS. Madam President, the Somalia Transition Plan is a long-term endeavor that requires constant efforts to achieve good governance through institutional capacity building. And in this regard, we highly appreciate the strong leadership by the President Mahmoud and the challenging circumstances for which Japan stands by. The extension of state authority should derive from the assurance of better social welfare through the reliable delivery of basic services, and this will help garner the trust of the population, which is paramount to degrading the capacities of al-Shabaab throughout the country. UN entities and humanitarian organizations need to promote holistic and coordinated assistance. The emphasis the President himself put on the education of Somali people is critically important. And the impact of climate change should be also properly considered and addressed in this regard. Japan, on its part, has contributed to capacity development of local government officials through training programs in Japan to help Somali's institution building efforts. We also provided emergency food assistance through WFP in the region to alleviate food insecurity for immediate needs. The resident coordinator system should be effectively utilized and should be at the center of our efforts. The Peace Building Commission can also play an important role to complement Somali-led state building in transition with its unique advising, bridging, convening capacity. Inter- and inter-clan conflicts are another security challenge in Somalia. Complex clan dynamics are deeply embedded in national politics, and peaceful coexistence between different clans must be the very foundation of the country's stability. The ongoing violence in Lasanud, which has caused a large number of civilian casualties and displaced people, is a serious concern. We commend the ongoing Somali-led national dialogue. All parties need to exercise maximum restraint to create a conducive environment for reconciliation. A successful transition in Somalia is essential for peace and stability in the entire region. It requires continued support by the international community, and Japan remains committed to playing its part to this end. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Special Representative Suef and Executive Director McCain, for your excellent briefings. We extend a warm welcome to Ms. Catriona Lang as she assumes her position as Special Representative of the Secretary General for Somalia. You have arrived at a critical time, and your leadership will be vitally important in the coming months. We also extend a warm welcome to His Excellency President Hassan Sheikh Mohammed and thank him for his contribution to today's meeting. We commend Somalia for its demonstrated commitment to fighting al-Shabaab and restoring security and stability in the country. This is a visible demonstration of the Somali people's desire for peace, stability, prosperity, and good governance. Overcoming Somalia's remaining challenges requires sustaining positive momentum on security, political reconciliation, and economic development. Liberating the remaining al-Shabaab-held territory in central Somalia and ensuring local communities receive the support they need to recover is vital to create the necessary conditions for successful operations further south. An inclusive discussion of the National Consultative Council proposals on the Constitution and elections is critical to ensuring such changes have broad popular support. Much is needed to achieve a ceasefire to halt the violence in Lahanud, allow and facilitate unhindered humanitarian access, and initiate constructive dialogue to resolve the dispute. We welcome the federal government of Somalia's recent efforts in this regard. Strengthening public sector financial management, conducting thorough, credible investigations of corruption allegations, and holding perpetrators accountable are imperative to building public trust and confidence in government. We also must continue our collective efforts to respond to the ongoing humanitarian emergency as we all heard this morning, that threatens nearly half of Somalia's population. We are particularly encouraged by Somalia's commitment to lead efforts to restore security and stability in the country, and the United States remains committed to partnering with Somalia to achieve these shared goals. We continue working to finalize our contribution to the Somali Security Force Trust Fund, and we encourage other donors to support the Somalia National Army's efforts through this mechanism. Despite the significant assistance efforts underway, there are still gaps. We must work together and think creatively about how to address these gaps to enable long-term stability, economic growth, and good governance in Somalia. Finally, we welcome Somalia's continued progress on the benchmarks outlined in the Secretary General's September 2022 report in assessing its request for fully lifting the arms embargo on the federal government. We look forward to further progress and to working closely with our partners on the Security Council on this issue when the 751 sanctions regime is renewed in November. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United States for his statement and now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Señora Presidenta, damos la bienvenida a la representante especial del Secretario General, señora Catriona Laín, a quien les deseamos éxito en sus labores. Agradecemos el trabajo realizado por el señor James Swan. Tomamos nota de la información que nos ha dado el señor Mohamed El Amin Souf y de la señora Cindy McCain. Reconozco y doy la bienvenida a la presencia del presidente de Somalia en esta reunión. Lamentamos los enfrentamientos entre los cuerpos de seguridad y fuerzas de la oposición en la ciudad de Garowe, donde fallecieron una veintena de personas, incluidos civiles, y llamamos a que se descalen las tensiones y se retorne la calma. Alentamos a que continúe el proceso de revisión constitucional sobre la base de un consenso inclusivo, de manera que asegure la participación efectiva de las mujeres, la juventud y las comunidades marginales, con miras a lograr la paz duradera, para lo cual se requiere la voluntad política de los líderes de Somalia. Solo de esa manera se podrá superar la violencia recurrente en varias regiones de Somalia. Situación esta que impide consolidar un ambiente conducente a combatir de manera eficaz la amenaza que representa el grupo terrorista Al-Shabaab para la paz y la seguridad de Somalia y de la región. El Ecuador condena los atentados terroristas contra la población civil y contra la misión de transición de la Unión Africana, como el ocurrido el 26 de mayo en la base de operaciones avanzadas de la ATMIS, en el que varios soldados ugandeses perdieron la vida y otros quedaron gravemente heridos. Esta violencia recurrente, agravada exponencialmente por el terrorismo de Al-Shabaab, al que condenamos, ha provocado un significativo número de víctimas y decenas de miles de desplazados, a los que se suman sequías e inundaciones, lo que agudiza aún más la ya precaria situación humanitaria. Efectivamente, según el informe de análisis de Naciones Unidas, se prevé que aproximadamente 6.6 millones de personas en Somalia experimentarán altos niveles de inseguridad alimentaria aguda, clasificada en crisis o superior en estos meses. Nos preocupa que el grupo terrorista Al-Shabaab siga suponiendo una grave amenaza para la paz, la seguridad y la estabilidad de Somalia y de la región, ante lo cual urge asegurar un cese al fuego y generar un diálogo nacional que favorezca la estabilidad y la recuperación política y económica. Para ello, los esfuerzos e iniciativas del gobierno federal de Somalia, de Etiopía y de los líderes de los clanes son indispensables. Además, los progresos realizados por Somalia en el Consejo Nacional Consultivo de Baidoa, en el que llegaron a acuerdos sobre el modelo fiscal y modificaciones al sistema de arquitectura de seguridad nacional, deben ser fortalecidos. Señor presidente, reiteramos la necesidad de preservar el espacio cívico sin restricciones a la libertad de expresión y al trabajo periodístico. El Ecuador considera muy grave las violaciones y abusos de derechos humanos contra cientos de niños durante este periodo y reprochamos los ataques contra escuelas y hospitales, así como el reclutamiento, secuestro o desplazamiento de niños y niñas cuyo retorno seguro y voluntario debe ser garantizado. Hacemos un llamado a la comunidad internacional a que siga apoyando los esfuerzos de protección de civiles en Somalia, incluyendo con relación al proceso de transición de ATMIS. Destacamos la centralidad de los esfuerzos de la Unión Africana, las organizaciones subregionales y los mecanismos regionales en las operaciones de paz. El Ecuador saluda estos avances y expresa su apoyo a toda iniciativa que favorezca la eficiencia y la efectividad de las operaciones de paz bajo el restricto respeto de los derechos humanos y el derecho internacional humanitario. Creemos además que es necesario contar con sistemas que permitan un manejo responsable y transparente de los recursos y garanticen la rendición de cuentas y el Estado de Derecho para hacer frente a los retos de seguridad. Finalmente, señor presidente, coincido con el secretario general que a través del diálogo sostenido se puede progresar en la agenda de construcción del Estado. Estamos seguros de que solamente a través de la presencia institucional, el fortalecimiento de los procesos de paz y reconciliación y el apoyo de la comunidad internacional en la implementación de sus soluciones integrales, podrán superarse los desafíos persistentes en Somalia. Muchas gracias.
I thank the representative of Ecuador. I give the floor to the representative of Malta.
President, we also welcome President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud to this meeting. I also thank Special Representative Lang for her briefing, and we wish you all the success for your new role. I also thank AU Special Representative Alamin Swef and WFP Executive Director McCain for their briefings. Malta is pleased to note the positive engagement of Somalia, which signals the country's sustained progress. We are encouraged by the recent agreements led by the National Consultative Council towards a model for fiscal federalism and the amendments to the national security architecture. As preparations are underway for next year's local and assembly elections, we reiterate that it is only with inclusive, free and fair elections and a safe civic space that all voices can be heard and represented. We call for the full, equal and meaningful participation of women in political, electoral and constitutional processes. We commend efforts towards the implementation of the Somali Women's Charter and the National WPS Action Plan, including the ongoing multi-stakeholder conversation among federal ministries, civil society and women leaders supported by UN Women. Nevertheless, Malta remains concerned with the security situation in the country, especially with the ongoing violence in Lasanot, which has left more than 300 casualties to date. We welcome the ceasefire efforts by Somali government, Ethiopia and clan elders, while reminding all parties of their obligations under international law. Malta strongly condemns all offensives carried out by Al-Shabaab, which continue to represent a serious threat to the peace, security and stability of Somalia. With surges in IEDs and complex attacks perpetrated by Al-Shabaab, with the latest one hitting an ATMIS fob in Bulomaria on 26th May. We remember the peacekeepers who were injured and also lost their lives, as well as their families. We welcome the commitment displayed by Somalia and its neighbours as Somalia's Frontline States initiative brings together Djibouti, Ethiopia and Kenya. These efforts should encourage further progress in the security transition from ATMIS, as well as coordination between Frontline States, ATMIS and partners. Malta remains supportive of ATMIS and its intended tasks to be completed by 2024. It is crucial for financial support to be diversified while acknowledging the EU's support of more than €2.2 billion to the mandated mission since its inception. President, Somalia remains heavily impacted by climate shocks. We commend the role of the Climate Security Advisor within UNSOM, whose work has enabled a better understanding of how prolonged drought and flash flooding heightens farmer-herder conflicts and civilians' susceptibility to radicalization and recruitment by Al-Shabaab. While famine has been averted thanks to sustained humanitarian assistance from donors, 6.6 million are still projected to be food insecure, and about 1.8 million children under 5 will likely face acute malnutrition and waterborne diseases such as cholera. We are gravely concerned by sexual and gender-based violence against internally displaced women and girls, as they comprise more than 80% of Somalia's IDPs. Perpetrators of such crimes must be held accountable. In this context, we welcome UNSOM's support in addressing impediments to accountability and incorporating a gender-responsive humanitarian response. Humanitarian partners should ensure closer collaboration between agencies to address these dire protection needs. Malta is also alarmed by the high number of grave violations committed against children, in particular recruitment and use and killing and maiming. We call on all parties to seize and prevent such violations, while we reiterate that child protection can only be effectively safeguarded through legal frameworks and relevant action plans and roadmaps. President, in closing, Malta reiterates its support to UNSOM and SRSG Lung. The crucial work of UNSOM continues to contribute towards lasting peace and security in Somalia. We remain encouraged by the multiplicity of voices engaged in advancing Somalia's state-building and security goals. The people of Somalia should remain at the heart of such efforts. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta. Now we give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et je souhaite tout d'abord la plus cordiale bienvenue à Son Excellence Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, Président de la République fédérale de Somalie. Votre présence témoigne de votre engagement à travailler ensemble avec ce Conseil afin d'assurer que la Somalie peut vivre en paix avec ses voisins et soi-même. Je remercie aussi la représentante spéciale Laing, le représentant spécial de l'Union africaine SWEF et la directrice exécutive du Programme alimentaire mondial McCain pour leur présentation. Et j'aimerais féliciter la représentante spéciale pour sa récente nomination et lui souhaiter un mandat réussi dans un contexte d'actualité politique importante. L'accord politique préliminaire conclu par le Conseil consultatif national en vue d'adopter un modèle électoral fondé sur le principe « une personne, une voix » est une décision significative. La Suisse salue cet accord. À cet égard, une étape historique a été franchie en Somalie avec les élections au Puntland. La Suisse a soutenu les autorités locales, notamment la commission électorale transitoire du Puntland, dans l'éducation et la mobilisation des électrices et électeurs. Afin d'avancer les priorités nationales, y inclut une coopération plus étroite entre les États membres fédéraux et le gouvernement fédéral. Nous considérons 3 points essentiels. Premièrement, le respect du droit international doit être au cœur de la réponse à l'insécurité dans l'ensemble du pays. Nous déplorons la poursuite des attaques d'Al-Shabaab, notamment les récentes attaques contre la base de la mission de transition de l'Union africaine et contre l'hôtel Pearl Beach à Mogadiscio et d'autres groupes armés. Nous reconnaissons les efforts déployés par le gouvernement et la mission de transition de l'Union africaine, ATMIS, pour y faire face. Nous appelons tous les acteurs à respecter les droits humains et le droit international humanitaire et à assurer la protection des civils, y compris des enfants. À cet égard, nous restons préoccupés par la poursuite du conflit à Las Qanout Nous appelons toutes les parties à faciliter et à garantir un accès humanitaire rapide et sans entrave à toutes les personnes dans le besoin, à convenir un cessez-le-feu et à s'engager dans un dialogue en vue d'une résolution pacifique de ce conflit. Deuxièmement, une approche coordonnée, holistique et inclusive doit guider les efforts de rétablissement précoce, de restauration de la présence de l'État et de consolidation de la paix dans les zones récupérées d'Al-Shabaab. Cela est essentiel pour restaurer et consolider le contrat social. La Suisse soutient, en collaboration avec l'ONU et les partenaires non gouvernementaux, des plateformes de dialogue ainsi que le renforcement des conseils de districts locaux afin de fournir des services de base. Nous promouvons également un engagement actif de l'ensemble de la société somalienne afin de renforcer la gouvernance locale et inclusive et de donner une voix aux femmes, aux jeunes et aux clans minoritaires. Celle-ci doit être entendue et intégrée dans les processus décisionnels. Troisièmement, nous constatons l'impact cumulatif des risques climatiques et du conflit armé sur la stabilité de la Somalie. Bien que l'aide humanitaire et les récentes pluies ont offert un soulagement aux populations dans le besoin, le relèvement prendra du temps, notamment en vue de la grave sécheresse qui sévit actuellement. Celle-ci et les récentes inondations ont contribué au déplacement de personnes. Nous devons donc investir dans des programmes de réponse humanitaire et de consolidation de la paix, prenant en compte l'adaptation au climat. Sinon, le prochain choc climatique ramènera les pays de nouveau au bord de la famine, aggravera les déplacements et exacerbera le conflit. Enfin, il est essentiel de réduire le risque de famine en brisant le cercle vicieux entre la violence et l'insécurité alimentaire aiguë, conformément aux dispositions de la résolution 2417. Monsieur le Président, j'aimerais féliciter la mission d'assistance des Nations Unies en Somalie pour le rôle crucial qu'elle joue. La Suisse continue de soutenir l'UNSOM, la Somalie et son peuple dans leurs efforts pour construire la paix et un avenir prospère. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of Switzerland and I give the floor to the representative of France.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président. Je tiens également à remercier les intervenants pour leurs interventions. Je salue la participation à cette réunion du président de la Somalie, son Excellence Monsieur Hassan Sheikh Mohamud. Et je tiens à féliciter Catherine Alang pour sa nomination à la tête de la MANUSOM, ainsi que Aïssa Karibo Kaïra pour sa nomination à la tête d'UNSOS. Qu'elles soient toutes les deux assurées du plein soutien de la France dans leurs fonctions. Je reviendrai pour ma part sur 3 points. Tout d'abord, les réformes institutionnelles et la lutte contre Al-Shabaab doivent se poursuivre et la France tient à saluer la nouvelle dynamique qui a été impulsée depuis 1 an pour mettre en œuvre plusieurs priorités nationales. Je pense notamment à l'approfondissement du fédéralisme avec un dialogue renouvelé entre le gouvernement fédéral et les États fédérés. Le renforcement des institutions et la finalisation de la Constitution doivent aboutir et il est essentiel que la participation des femmes, des jeunes soit assurée dans l'ensemble de ces processus. La France réitère sa ferme condamnation des attaques terroristes des Shebab, y compris contre l'ATMIS, et nous saluons les succès qui ont été engrangés par le gouvernement somalien dans la lutte contre le groupe. Avec l'appui de l'initiative des États frontaliers, ces efforts doivent se poursuivre dans le respect des droits de l'homme et du droit international humanitaire. La restauration de l'autorité de l'État, l'accès aux services de base dans les territoires reconquis permettront de consolider la paix. La France est par ailleurs très préoccupée par les violences qui se poursuivent à Las Anod et nous saluons les efforts du gouvernement somalien en vue de restaurer le dialogue et de permettre une désescalade. Il est impératif de protéger les civils et de s'assurer d'un accès humanitaire sûr et sans entrave. Deuxième point, la protection des Somaliens les plus vulnérables doit être assurée. Les violences commises contre les enfants, en particulier, doivent cesser. Et la France soutient tous les efforts du gouvernement somalien pour mettre en œuvre le plan d'action pour prévenir le recrutement et l'emploi d'enfants. Ils doivent se poursuivre. Nous encourageons par ailleurs l'établissement d'un espace civique qui donne voix aux acteurs de la société civile, qui permettent la participation pleine et entière des femmes à la gouvernance du pays. La situation humanitaire continue à se dégrader avec plus de la moitié des Somaliens nécessitant une assistance. Et pour répondre aux besoins des populations qui sont impactées par la sécheresse depuis le mois de décembre 2021, je voulais rappeler que l'Union européenne a fourni 170 millions d'euros d'aide humanitaire à la Somalie et la France appelle l'ensemble des partenaires internationaux à renforcer leur contribution au plan de réponse humanitaire des Nations Unies. Enfin, et c'est mon dernier point, la transition sécuritaire doit s'accélérer. Le Conseil de sécurité s'apprête à renouveler le mandat de l'ATMIS. Les objectifs de la résolution 26-28 du Conseil de sécurité doivent continuer à guider notre soutien pour que les Somaliens prennent en charge leur propre sécurité à moyen terme et pour permettre le retrait définitif de l'ATMIS au 31 décembre 2024. Et pour cela, la préparation des prochaines phases de retrait est importante et doit s'accélérer. Depuis 2007, je rappelle que l'Union européenne est le contributeur direct le plus important aux missions de l'Union africaine en Somalie, avec un montant total de 2,5 milliards d'euros depuis la création. D'autres partenaires doivent aussi participer à cet effort. L'engagement de l'Union européenne se poursuivra. Elle se poursuivra progressivement au profit des forces somaliennes elles-mêmes. En début d'année, l'Union européenne a ainsi approuvé 25 millions d'euros d'aide supplémentaire pour l'armée nationale somalienne pour la période courant de 2022 à 2024. Et cette aide leur fournira du matériel non létal et appuiera les travaux d'infrastructure en étroite coordination avec la mission de formation de l'Union européenne en Somalie, EUTM. Monsieur le Président Hassan Sheikh Mohamud et son gouvernement peuvent compter sur le plein soutien de la France pour faire avancer la Somalie sur le chemin de la paix. Je vous remercie.
I thank the representative of France. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
Yes.